things from outside: difficulty, circumstances, dependency, duty, all these external forces. Now he says, nothing from outside incites it to recognize limits to itself. Consequently, it refers at all times to other authorities higher than itself. Right? Nothing from outside forces on it any limitation. It refuses to see external limitations. The masses of a current generation, from the 19th, the 20th, and now the 21st century, for the last 3 centuries, really two in like a decade, for the last 200 plus years, the masses have refused to see any limitation from external social conditions, right? Technological advances won't be a limiting factor. Why? Because our minds are becoming ever greater. Our ability to process information and the technology which we create has become increasingly efficient, right? You just look at the ability to hold data, right? I remember when I was going to school, they had the 3.5 floppy disk, right? And you might be able to hold, I don't know, a half a meg on that. And then they had the A drive floppy disk, right? Or the hard disk, right? And it was like a meg and a half that you could hold on that. Then they had the zip drives, and it was insane to think of a zip drive that had 100 megs. And then that wasn't enough, right? The limit of 100 megs was too constraining. So we needed more, right? So then we went from the zip drive to external hard drives, right? And then you had external hard drives of maybe at first like 5 or 10 gigs, then 100 gigs, then 500 gigs. Now we have external hard drives of 1 terabyte. And I can assure you that there'll be whatever comes after that, right? 500 terabyte external hard drives, if they even exist. I'm sure they do. There is a refusal by the masses. And the reason why I gave that example of sort of the evolution of storage capacity and technology is that it's a direct representation of a refusal to see a limitation. Our dependency being one of these limitations that he mentioned before, our dependency on memory consumption is seemingly a limitation. In any other century, it would have limited the generation. The generation would have said, listen, all that you can do is process information and store information up until 100 megs or 1.5 megs. Ever since the 19th century, we recognize that there's a direct relationship between the things that we want, and this is important, right? There's a direct relationship between the things that we want and our desires and the technological know-how to satisfy those desires. The technological know-how to satisfy our wants. And it's important, as we saw in our last discussion in chapter 6, that it's not just the material organization. He makes a distinction between social organizations and material organizations, all of which are at the foundation of this structure, this superstructure called society, called existence. Material organization is constituted by your engineers, your physicists, your scientists, your hard science. Your social organization is constituted by people like myself, your researchers, your academicians, your politicians, your public servants, your human rights advocates, and so on. It's those two groups, the social organization and the material organization, that serve as the buttress, the foundation, the support structure for the rest of society, according to Gasset. And what Gasset says is that we are in a society now that refuses to see any limitation. So in refusing to see any limitation by the masses are therefore creating greater demands on the social organization and the material organization. Okay, that might have been a sort of hard to follow that. What is it saying? You can imagine that the masses, it's easier to talk about material organization than social organization, right? Material organization being like your engineers, right? The masses have a greater need for consumption. They have a greater need to store information that they've gathered. Pictures, videos, data, whatever it might be. In previous times, 1.5 megabytes might have been sufficient. But with the advent of the digital camera, with the advent of the digital video camcorder, 1.5 megabytes becomes trite. We can't use that. What the masses do then is that they create a demand, right? They externalize it, right? Instead of seeing a limitation, they externalize a demand. And who are they externalizing this demand on, right? Who are they externalizing this demand on? Well, according to Gasset, and we saw this in chapter 6, the masses are externalizing their demands on the social and the material organization. Right? They're externalizing this demand, right? They're saying, we have a right, right? We have a right. What is that right? Well, we have a right to make sure that we live prosperous and happy lives and so on and so forth. And then there's this conflation of rights into this desire, so that rights and desires become conflated for the masses. And the masses now are saying, I have a right to have more memory. Well, do you really have a right to have more memory in your hard drives? I don't know. Right? I have a desire, I have a need, I have a want to have more memory in my hard drives, and they create a duty, an obligation on the social and material organization. Now, the material organization, the physicists, the scientists, the engineers, now recognize that there is a desire, right? So, more appropriately said, it's more the desire. Right? It's more the desire for something, right? And we'll see how this desire shifts from a want to a need, which is sort of sick in a sense, but it happens, right? This desire to have more storage capacity. And members within the material organization, the engineers, probably mechanical software engineers, electrical engineers, recognize this desire, and they translate this desire into actually operative product-based things that can satisfy that desire, right? So they create the zip drive, and then they create the terabyte drive and whatever, right? Also, it's the case that the masses, all their desires aren't product-based, right? They might desire justice. They might desire healthcare. They might desire safety and security, peace, clean water, and so on, social services, right? They desire that from the social organization. So they desire to be educated. They come to academia. They desire to be protected. They go to the government. They desire to have their health needs required. They go to medical doctors and nurses and so on, right? So that it's important to recognize how this relates, right? Instead of seeing limitations in previous generations and previous centuries, the masses now are limitless, right? And the desires subsequently are limitless. Where does that corresponding obligation, that burden go? It goes on the social organization, and it's up to us now to satisfy the demands of the masses. The demands to be educated, the demands to be entertained, the demands to be safe, the demands to be healthy, and so on. Okay. So that understandably was a bit more complex, but hopefully it's clear now how Gasset equates this limitation with the desire of the masses. It should now make sense. The masses, and in particular the masked man, furthermore, they refuse to accept the authority of others, right? As we've seen, right? There is not going to be an acceptance of limitation. So if there's not going to be an acceptance of limitation, why would I accept the authority from someone else? Because an outside authority is understood in terms of an imposition. I'm limiting something. I'm saying that there is something that cannot or can be done, right? So there won't be an acceptance of outside authority. Gasset goes into pretty detailed explanation of this refusal, not only to accept limitation, not only to accept obligation, but also a refusal to accept outside or external authority, right? So that each individual, and you can see how paradoxical this becomes, right? Each individual becomes his or her own basis of authority, right? So we have authority everywhere, and where there is always authority, there really is no authority.